If you send me back into that white hell, Mr. Ward, you'll be burying my husband's child with me.
Silas Ward had opened his front door that January night for one reason only: to drag in another armload of wood before the wind buried the chopping block for good. Instead, he found a woman braced against the frame with both gloved hands, a drift curling around her skirts and packing itself into the corners of his entry like spilled flour. Snow clung to her eyelashes. Her shawl had stiffened to a white shell. Ugly sound of a mare tugging against leather. The woman's words struck him harder than the cold had. He had no habit of taking strangers into his house, not with 14-year-old Ruthie asleep in the back room and gossip in Plum Creek fed by less than a shared cup of coffee. But one glance downward ended whatever argument his caution had started. The woman was visibly pregnant, her hand spread low across her belly as if to hold the child inside by force of will. Silas stepped aside without flourish. "Ruthie," he called over his shoulder, "stir the stove. We've got company." Then to the woman, plain and brisk, she did not swoon, did not thank him in the trembling fashion of dime novels, and did not release the satchel slung across her shoulder even when the warmth struck her hard enough to make her knees soften. That earned his respect faster than pretty manners would have. Ruthie appeared at once in her wool stockings and her brother's old flannel nightshirt, hair in 2 rough braids, already lifting the kettle lid to check the water. "My name is Marianne Doyle. The mare is gray, half blind in the left eye, and contrary when frightened. If she rears, don't yank the near rein. Speak first. Ask." Silas gave a short nod and took the lantern. When he crossed the yard, the wind nearly shoved him sideways, but the mare did exactly as Marianne had warned. Lunged. By the time he got the animal into the lean-to and stripped the harness, his mustache had glazed with ice. Inside, he found Marianne sitting bolt upright near the stove, boots off, wet stockings steaming, while Ruthie held a mug near her without quite daring to hand it over. Marianne accepted the broth only after asking the price of oats and stable room, which told Silas more about her condition than any trembling confession could have done. A person who led with payment had either too much pride or too little mercy shown them in recent months. In his experience, it was usually both. "You can settle the account when the weather settles," he said, setting her satchel on the table as carefully as if it were glass. It gave a solid metallic clink when it landed. "Papers, probably. Maybe something more. Where were you aiming in this?" She lifted the mug in both hands, letting the heat work into her fingers before she answered. "Plum Creek first, then Red Willow if I had to keep on." Ruthie, who had never learned how to leave a silence alone, blurted, "No one goes toward Red Willow in a storm unless they're desperate or..." Silas crouched by the stove and adjusted the draft, pretending greater interest in the iron than he felt. "How far along are you?" he asked, her chin lifted half an inch at the bluntness, though she did not flinch from it. 7 months? Maybe a touch more. "The baby come..." He told himself he would let her thaw, then hitch the team and take her straight into town if the wind dropped enough to keep them from wandering into a fence line or creek bed. That was the respectable arrangement. It was the safe arrangement. His life had been reduced, over the last 4 years, to a series of hard little safeties. Keep the note paid 1 month at a time. Keep Ruthie clothed and schooled. Keep strangers from bringing disorder into a house that could barely manage its own grief. Yet when he said, "If the gusts ease, I can drive you to Mrs. Halverson's place or the hotel in Plum Creek," Marianne put the mug down so carefully it might have been made of spun sugar, and fixed him with a stare as steady as a fence post sunk in frozen ground. "That's what I was stopping," she said. "I'm not asking you for a parlor and piano. I'm asking you not to take a woman who's been tossed half the day across ruts and drifts, put her back on a sleigh seat. I know what contractions feel like. I know what real labor isn't yet, and I know that road. If your gentleman conscience needs a bargain, I'll scrub floors, mend shirts, tally feed sacks, or sleep upright in that chair. But I am not going back out tonight." The room went quiet, except for the hard breathing of the stove. Silas realized, with a flash of that he had been answered the way he sometimes answered men at the grain yard when they confused stubbornness with good judgment. Before he could reply, a long shudder came through the stovepipe and a bitter ribbon of smoke pushed into the room. Ruthie coughed and stepped back. Silas swore under his breath, reached for the damper, and found it stuck again. He had meant to scrape the soot 2 weeks earlier, and then another job had shoved in front of it. The way all jobs did on a place where a man could not afford help. Marianne set down the mug, rose with one hand on the chair back, and crossed to the stove in her stocking feet despite both of them telling her not to. "Not that lever," she said. "The draft's choking at the elbow. Have you got a knitting needle? A narrow nail? Anything stiff?" Ruthie fetched a hat pin from the mantel. Marianne bent, fed it through the side vent, and worked by feel, listening with her head slightly tilted. A soot clump dropped somewhere inside. The pull changed, and the smoke cleared like a curtain. "Survey camps used poorer stoves than this," she said, straightening slowly. Ruthie's eyes widened with pure admiration. "Did you really sleep in tents?" Marianne nodded once. "In tents, wagons, depots, and one church, with no floorboards. A storm doesn't improve any of them." By the time she had eaten half a plate of beans and cornbread, color had returned to her cheeks, though the tiredness in her face stayed put. Silas saw it the way he saw weather signs in a horse's flank. Not dramatic, but telling. He hung her wet shawl on the chair by the stove and, because he could not help noticing useful things, he studied the satchel she still kept within reach. It was brown leather, scarred white at the corners, and heavy enough to drag the tablecloth when Ruthie bumped it. A brass instrument protruded from its mouth where the clasp had failed a surveyor's compass. Old but well kept. That made sense of the camp talk. It also made him curious, which he disliked almost as much as disorder. Curiosity invited questions. Questions invited history. History had a habit of taking up space in a house. "Marianne Doyle," he said at last, sitting opposite her with his own tin cup untouched between his hands. "What sends a surveyor's widow over county roads in a storm instead of waiting one more day?" She met the question squarely. "Hunger, if you want the shortest answer. Work, if you want the respectable." The room I was renting in Gibbon was already promised to someone else, so I chose motion over pity. That might have been enough said by anyone else, but Silas had spent too many years around men who shaved truth down to the smallest coin they thought another person would accept. "And family?" he asked. She gave a small, humorless breath that was not quite a laugh. "Scattered, buried, or tired of helping. My husband's brothers are decent enough from the church steps to the road gate. After that, they begin to count costs. I don't blame them more than they deserve. A pregnant widow is not a light parcel." Ruthie, who sat cross-legged on the hearth rug mending a mitten seam, said fiercely, "That's a wicked thing to say." Marianne turned her head toward the girl. "No. Wicked is when people pretend generosity they do not feel. Plain counting is only plain." Silas knew something about plain counting. On the shelf by the door sat his ledger, a squat and figures for drainage tile he had not yet been able to buy. He did not intend to lay that whole burden before a stranger, yet he knew the shape of desperation when it sat at his table and refused to sweeten itself for company. Near midnight, the mare in the lean-to began striking the wall with one hoof, sharp and rapid. Silas set down his cup and reached for his coat. Marianne's head came up at once. "She'll do that if the belly strap rubbed her raw," she said, "or if you left her bridle on in panic." "I did neither," he answered, more shortly than he meant. Then, because tiredness sharpened his temper and fairness sharpened it back again, he added, but I'd rather check than guess." He had only reached the entry when she said, "Take warm water." Her mouth was foamy when we pulled in. She may have swallowed too much snow. The advice was practical, unworried, and entirely useful. In the lean-to, he found that she was right once again. The mare was not wild, only thirsty in the foolish way frightened animals got, reaching for snow instead of the bucket. He found Marianne not resting but rolling bandages from old flour sacking at the table while Ruthie watched. "For what?" he asked. But because the next task would come sooner if one did. Ruthie fell asleep at last with her mending in her lap, and Silas carried her to the small back room she had used since his sister and brother-in-law died of fever 2 winters before. When he returned, Marianne had loosened her hair from under its damp pins and braided it fresh, one dark rope over her shoulder. She had not touched the bed he had made up on the front room settee. Good, he thought, then felt foolish for thinking it. He sat at the table and opened the ledger he had meant to study after chores, more out of habit than hope. The columns blurred together. Marianne's gaze dropped to the page, then to the rolled plat tucked under it. "You're keeping 2 tallies for the same acreage," she said. "One for what should produce, and one for what actually did. That offend your bookkeeper's soul?" Which made him answer more than he intended. "The south quarter drowned. The ditch company swore the grade was right. I swore my wheat didn't care. Now the note comes due before thaw's well settled, and I can't fight water, bankers, and weather in the same week." She held out her hand. "May I?" He hesitated, then passed her the plat. She unrolled it carefully, revealing faded section lines and a pencil correction near the creek bend. "Who drew this revision?" she asked. "A county man 3 years ago. A lazy one," she said. And for the first time that night, genuine feeling, not fear, not exhaustion, but professional offense, warmed her voice. She reached for the satchel, drew out the brass compass, and laid it beside the plat with the tenderness one grants a thing that has outlived the person who used it. "The creek shifted after spring washout, didn't it?" she asked. 2 seasons ago, Silas said. "Took part of Hembry's fence." Marianne traced the penciled correction with one finger. "Then this line is guessing at the old bank, not measuring the new one. If the ditch was graded from that, your water would slow right here." She tapped a spot near the... "I can't swear it until I walk the line with a rod and level. But if I'm right, you've been fighting a map as much as mud." The room held still around that thought. Outside, the blizzard rasped across the boards like a file over metal. Inside, Silas felt something rarer than hope and more dangerous. The possibility that help might come wearing a stranger's face. He sat back. "If the road's closed tomorrow," he said slowly, "and only if you're fit for it later, would you look at the lower quarter with me?" Marianne set the compass atop the plat and met him across the table. "That depends," she said. "Am I a burden you mean to push onward at daylight? Or a woman earning one night's shelter?" At dawn, the storm had not ended so much as exhausted itself. The sky was a hard, pewter lid, the yard one long rolling shape of drifts, fences nearly erased. Silas dug to the barn, watered the stock, and walked as far as the road rise before turning back. No wagon would make Plum Creek that day. The bridge at Miller's Cut, if it still stood, would be buried. Setting biscuits on the stove lid while Ruthie measured coffee as solemnly as a preacher taking tithe. She had found work without asking leave, and the sight should have irritated him. Instead, it settled something. He took off his gloves and said, "The road's closed. Likely till tomorrow, maybe longer." Marianne's hands stilled only for a second. "Then I'll stay out of your way." "That won't do." He set the shovel by the door. "If you're under my roof, be in it proper." Front room's too drafty. Ruthie will move to the alcove for a few nights, and you can take the spare room. In return, once you've rested, and if you're able, you can help me sort that ledger and tell me whether my lower quarter's been losing a Ward of bad arithmetic." Ruthie beamed before Marianne could answer. Marianne studied him as if measuring whether pride could survive practical necessity. At last, she gave one firm nod. "Room and board for honest work, then," she said. "Only until the road opens." Silas pulled out a chair and sat down to the first hot breakfast he had not cooked himself in months. "Only until the road opens," he repeated, though something in the way the compass gleamed beside his plate suggested the matter had already become larger than weather. The storm kept them inside until nearly noon, and by then Silas had already discovered that Marianne Doyle did not know. Silas leaned over her shoulder and grunted. "They usually confess to costing more than I hoped." Marianne's mouth twitched. The humor was brief, but Ruthie caught it and smiled into the sack she was patching. By midday, the weather had softened enough that the barn roof showed black against the snow, though the road remained useless. Marianne stood at the window studying the slope beyond the cottonwoods. "If I can see the lower fence, we can at least take bearings from here," she said. Silas frowned at her belly. She saw it. "I said take bearings. I did not say wrestle a plow." After a moment, he fetched Thomas Doyle's old compass from the table and placed it in her palm. She closed her fingers around it, and something in her expression sharpened from widow to surveyor. They began from the front porch, Silas holding a measuring chain he had not used since buying the farm, and Marianne working with the compass, a carpenter's level, and a narrow sighting rod Ruthie improvised from a straight broom handle, and waited while she sighted. Twice, he started to correct her, because the ditch line he knew from memory ran differently. Twice, she told him to hold still. On the third measurement, she waved him back and spread his county plat on an overturned feed crate. "Your map says the fall begins farther west," she said. "It doesn't. The land lifts just enough here to make the ditch hesitate." Silas crouched beside her. "That rise is barely a hand." "A hand can be enough." Ruthie laughed so loudly the mare nickered from the lean-to. Silas gave Marianne a look. "You say that in survey camp?" "No." Survey camp language was worse. For the first time since the storm, all three of them laughed together, and the sound felt strangely at home against the barn boards. The work stopped when Marianne's boot broke through crusted snow near the fence, and she lurched sideways. Silas caught her elbow before she fell, but she jerked free so quickly that he released her at once. The space between, "Then you choose the pace." That surprised her more than any question might have. She looked toward the lower field, then toward the house. "We have enough for today," she said at last. "I need the old spring runoff marks tomorrow if the weather clears." Silas nodded. On their way back, she stopped beside the twisted gate hinge he had failed to repair before the... "Then mark this one." She drew a small X beside the gate location on the back of his plat. Silas almost objected to someone else writing on his papers. Instead, he watched her make the mark and realized he had already begun to trust her eye more than his pride. That afternoon gave them their first failure. Marianne calculated the ditch's intended fall from Silas's old figures and became convinced that a short cut through the frozen berm would restore enough drainage to save spring planting. The soil near the barn had softened under packed manure, so Silas decided they could test the idea. For an hour, the plan looked sound. Then the thin crust collapsed, and a hidden pocket of icy water surged out, flooding the shallow trench and soaking Silas to the knee. Worse, the rush undercut one side and exposed a length of old clay drain tile shattered beneath the soil. Silas stared at it. jaw tight. That wasn't on any bill. Marianne crouched carefully at the edge. Because whoever laid it probably did it before you bought the place. He wanted anyone useful. Instead, he looked at his boot filling with black water and said, "I cut before we knew what was under us." Marianne met his eyes. "And I told you where to cut before I knew either." They spent the next hour packing straw and boards against the breach. The failure left them colder, dirtier, and more certain that guessing would cost them dearly. The next morning brought clear sky, hard cold, and a silence over the farm, so complete that every axe stroke seemed to travel a mile. Marianne insisted she was fit to walk, but Silas compromised by hitching the mare to a fence post stained dark to nearly the same height, and a shallow scour where water had crossed the field instead of entering the ditch. Marianne studied the ground for nearly 20 minutes before speaking. "Your problem isn't one bad grade," she said. "It's two." She pointed first toward the creek, then back to the broken tile. The surface ditch was cut wrong, but somebody also tried to correct it with buried drain. When that tile failed, the field began holding both surface water and seepage. Silas rubbed his jaw. "Meaning? Meaning if you only deepen the ditch, you may make the lower soil collapse. We need to trace the tile before we touch anything else." That was not the cheap answer he wanted. It was, he suspected, the correct one. He exhaled through his nose. "All right, show me how." They used a steel rod to probe the ground in a line from the broken section, moving slowly across the field. Silas pushed, Marianne marked. Ruthie tied scraps of red cloth to stakes so they could find the route after another snowfall. Your county revision ignored what was underground. Silas looked at the row of red markers cutting across the snow. Can it be fixed without buying half the state in tile? Maybe. She had learned enough about his finances not to promise what he could not afford. If the upper run is intact, we may be able to open a relief trench only where the broken section backs up. But I need to see where it empties. Ruthie pointed toward a stand of willows along the boundary. There's an old stone box down there. I found frogs in it last summer. Silas turned. What stone box? Ruthie shrugged. The one you told me not to climb in. Marianne and Silas exchanged a look, then started toward the willows. Sometimes the best information on a farm lived inside the head of the person no one thought to ask. The stone box turned out to be a collapsed outlet chamber, half hidden by roots and years of silt. One side had fallen inward, pinching the tile and forcing water back toward the field. Silas knelt in the snow and cleared mud with lime I can buy, stone I can haul. Marianne shook her head. You also need someone who understands how much water this takes at thaw. Guess too small and you build a dam. He bristled. I've been farming this place 6 years, and I spent 9 years watching men underestimate water because it looked harmless in August. The words came sharper than either intended. Silas rose. So I know nothing? I said no such thing. Ruthie stopped tying a marker and went very still. Marianne's face closed. For one long second, Silas could have protected his pride by ending the argument. Instead, he looked at the collapsed chamber, then at the survey stakes, proving she had been right all morning. All right, he said. I heard insult where you gave warning. Say it again. Marianne's shoulders eased a fraction. Build for April, not January. He nodded. Add that I can remember. That night, Silas took the ledger from the shelf and placed it in front of Marianne before she asked. If we rebuild the outlet in March and cut only the relief section, what would you need? He said. She opened the book, then turned to a blank page. First, stop thinking only in money. Marianne added a fourth column, labor that could be traded instead of bought. Silas watched the page change from a record of shortage into a map of possibilities. It did not make him rich. It did not erase the banknote, but it made the problem smaller, which was almost as useful. Before closing the book, Marianne drew 2 tiny marks in the margin. One beside the collapsed outlet, another beside the twisted gate. Those are the gate, if stuck, crowd toward high ground. Silas frowned at the second mark, then nodded. He would remember it. Across the room, Ruthie had fallen asleep with the brass compass in its case beside her school book, entrusted to her for the evening. Marianne noticed it, but did not reach to take it back. Three days after the storm, the road to Plum Creek finally opened in narrow ruts between towering banks of snow. Silas expected Marianne to begin packing before breakfast. Instead, she stood at the window for a long time. Possible isn't the same as sensible. No. She turned. But I came here to find work. Silas set the leather down. Then work here until the thaw problem's solved. Marianne stared at him. He continued before pride could ruin the offer. I can't pay survey wages. I can give room, board, and a small weekly amount once grain sells. In return, you help me trace the drainage, straighten the accounts. Ruthie stopped sweeping. Marianne's expression changed very little, but she reached for the brass compass on the table and turned it once beneath her fingers. Temporary, she said. Through the drainage work. Silas nodded. Temporary. She held out her hand. He took it, loosed. The bargain was plain, practical, and limited. Yet when their hands parted, the compass remained on the... By the second week of February, Marianne had acquired 3 places in Silas Ward's house without asking for any of them. One was the right-hand corner of the kitchen table, where she spread ledgers, maps, and folded receipts each, and the small tin of ginger Marianne used when the baby made ordinary food seem offensive. None of these changes had been discussed. They simply appeared through repetition, the way wagon ruts deepened until they became a road. Silas noticed them because he noticed everything that altered how a house worked. He also noticed that Marianne had stopped keeping her satchel beside her chair during meals. It now rested beneath the desk in the front room, still closed, but no longer guarded. The brass compass remained on the kitchen table most days. Ruthie polished its case with a rag whenever Marianne allowed it, treating the instrument with the reverence other girls reserved for jewelry. You'll rub the markings clean off one day, Marianne warned. Ruthie grinned. Then you'll have to teach me well enough that I don't need them. Marianne tried to look stern and failed. Their drainage work became the rhythm around which everything else arranged itself. On clear mornings, Silas broke crusted snow from the lower field, while Marianne marked suspected tile lines with stakes. She could tell from the angle of fence posts where spring water had pushed through. She noticed that one corner of the barnyard stayed glazed longer than the rest because runoff pooled beneath it. She even corrected Silas's estimate of the distance from the lower swale to the road by nearly 30 yards. You pace like a man who thinks long legs are surveying equipment, she told him. Silas, carrying 2 buckets, replied, Long legs cost me nothing. Ruthie had started keeping score of their disagreements on a slate by the pantry door. S meant Silas had been right. M meant Marianne. By the end of 1 week, Marianne led 9-6. Silas accused Ruthie of corruption. Ruthie informed him that bribery required money and she had received none. Marianne laughed hard enough to press a hand against her belly, and the sound startled Silas into laughing too. Domestic familiarity grew in less obvious ways. Marianne learned that Silas took coffee black until a difficult morning, when he added a spoon of molasses and pretended it was for energy rather than comfort. Silas learned that, or survey chains until the numbers behaved. Marianne repaired Silas's torn shirt once, but refused when he handed her 3 more. 1 mending is gratitude, she said. 4 becomes employment I did not agree to. He accepted the distinction and learned to sew his own buttons badly. In return, Silas built a narrow footstool because Marianne's ankles swelled by evening. He left it beneath her chair while she was asleep and denied making it she said the next morning, testing it with both feet. It fits me exactly. Lucky scrap wood. Remarkable carpenter. Neither smiled until Ruthie turned away. There was something safe in these small exchanges because none demanded anything. Help could be offered, accepted, and left unburdened by meaning. The first neighbor to notice the change was Amos Hembry, whose farm lay east of Silas's creek fence. Amos arrived one gray afternoon with a sack of cracked corn and the news. "Heard you had somebody stranded here," Amos said. "Heard right," Silas replied. Amos's eyes moved to Marianne's belly, then to the compass, then back again. "And she surveys?" Marianne answered for herself. "I keep books, take field bearings, and occasionally rescue farmers from bad ditch maps." Amos scratched his beard. "Silas need rescuing?" "Frequently," Ruthie said from the hearth. Silas pointed at her without turning. "Schoolwork." Marianne had asked him about spring flooding on his side of the creek and learned something Silas had not known. The old tile outlet once drained farther east before Hembry's father rerouted a cattle lane. That single detail altered their repair sketch and gave Marianne another line to trace when the snow receded. A week later, Ruthie brought home the first trouble that had nothing to do with water. Two girls at the Plum Creek school had asked whether Marianne was Silas's new wife and whether the baby belonged to him. Silas's warning came too late. "They are." Marianne folded her hands over her lap. "And what did they say after that?" "That decent women don't live in unmarried men's houses." The room seemed to shrink. Silas set down his fork. "Tomorrow I'll speak to their father." Marianne looked at him. "No, they're putting your name in their mouths." "Then let them chew carefully. I want you to understand that defending me publicly can sound very much like claiming me. I won't have that either." The words landed harder than she intended. Silas leaned back, jaw tightening, but before the silence hardened, Ruthie said quietly, "Then what am I supposed to say?" Marianne turned to her. "Say, I work here. Say I pay my way." Marianne sighed. "Only in your head." Silas did not mention the school gossip again, but he changed one thing the next morning. Before riding into Plum Creek, he asked Marianne whether she wanted anything from town. She handed him a list lamp oil, writing paper, ginger, and a spool of gray thread, and then hesitated. "If you see Mrs. Halverson, tell her I would like to call on her next week, during daylight." Silas understood. Marianne was building a public life that did not depend on his house. He offered, "No, I'll go there." He did not argue. When he returned, he brought the requested items, a small sack of oranges from the rail depot, and nothing else. Marianne lifted one orange from the sack, as if he had brought back a jewel. "These weren't on the list." "No." "Then why?" Silas shrugged while hanging up his coat. "Ruthie said you'd been wanting something sour." Ruthie's head snapped around. "I said no such." Silas looked at. Marianne turned the orange in her palm, her thumb brushing the bright skin. "They're expensive in winter." "Then eat it slowly." That evening she divided one into 3 equal portions. Silas ate his without comment, but he remembered the smell of citrus in the kitchen long after the peels had dried beside the stove. Their second real setback came not from the drainage line, but from the mare. One morning, Marianne found the gray standing with her right hind leg cocked awkwardly, refusing weight. Silas examined the hoof and found heat near the frog. "Stone bruise," he said. "Maybe an abscess." Marianne disagreed. She slipped before the storm. "It may be higher." Silas trusted his live. 2 days later, the swelling had climbed above the fetlock. The mare would barely walk. Silas swore at himself, then fetched Amos, who knew more about horse legs than pride. Amos pressed along the tendon and said, "Strain, most like. She favors the hoof because the leg hurts." Marianne did not say "I told you so." That made it worse. Silas stood in the lean-to, rubbing one hand over his face. "I treated the wrong injury." "You treated the most likely one," Marianne said. "Likely isn't the same as certain." He looked at her. "That sounds familiar." She gave him a small nod. They rigged a sling to support the mare during rest, and changed the work schedule because the animal could no longer pull a sled. By late February, Ruthie had become part of the drainage project in earnest. Marianne taught her to keep a field notebook with dates, weather, measurements, and questions instead of conclusions. "Never write what you hope the land is doing," she told the girl. "Write what you actually saw." Ruthie loved the rule because it sounded like permission to distrust adults. Silas carved her a shorter measuring rod. One afternoon near the cottonwoods, Ruthie found a shallow depression hidden beneath brush where the old tile likely crossed into Hembree's land. Marianne praised her observation, and Ruthie glowed for the rest of the day. That night, she asked Marianne whether women could work surveying crews. Marianne considered before answering. "Some do the work without receiving the title. That isn't fair." "No." "Then I'll take the title." Silas, cleaning harness at the table, said, "You might first finish long division." Ruthie threw a rag at him. Marianne laughed, then suddenly caught her breath and pressed both hands to her belly. Silas was on his feet before she spoke. "It's all right," she said. The baby kicked hard. Ruthie rushed over. "Can I feel?" Marianne hesitated only a moment before guiding the girl's hand to the movement beneath her dress. Silas stayed where he was, one hand still holding the harness buckle. The moment was intimate in a way he had not expected, and he had no wish to intrude. Ruthie's face transformed when she felt the child move. "Again," she whispered, as though addressing the baby directly. Marianne smiled down at her. Then Ruthie looked over her shoulder. "Uncle Silas, come feel." His first instinct was refusal, not from disgust or he looked to Marianne instead of Ruthie. Marianne noticed the question in that glance. For a heartbeat, she seemed uncertain. Then she nodded. "If you want." Silas crossed the room slowly and placed 2 fingers where she indicated, careful enough that Marianne nearly smiled at his caution. Nothing happened. "Stubborn," he said. "Takes after someone." Marianne's eyebrow rose. Then the baby kicked firmly against his hand. Silas froze, a living insistence, small and unseen, answering the world from inside her. He drew his hand back almost immediately. "Strong one," he said. Marianne's expression softened. Thomas used to say the same. The name rested between them without souring the moment. After Ruthie went to bed, Marianne remained by the stove with the compass open in her lap. She turned it gently, watching the needle settle north each time. "Thomas gave me this our first winter married," she said. Silas sat opposite, repairing a glove seam with poor stitches. She had never volunteered a story about her husband before. He said, "I argued with directions enough that I ought to own an instrument." But he respected skill. If I corrected his figures and proved it, he used mine. Her thumb rested on a scratch along the brass rim. After he died, I kept thinking the compass was the last thing that still knew where we were supposed to go. Silas did not tell her that objects could not know such things. She knew that already. Instead, he said, "Maybe it only tells you where north is. The rest is your business." That sounds annoyingly sensible. I save my best thinking for bad sewing. She glanced at his crooked stitches. "Then heaven preserve us when you repair socks." The grief did not disappear. It simply made room for humor beside it. By the first days of March, the snow began to shrink from fence posts and south-facing slopes. Their temporary agreement should have felt nearer its end. Instead, Marianne's place in the household had become harder to define and easier to see. Her handwriting filled half the ledger. Her measurements marked the farm plat. Her orange peels dried in a jar for tea. Ruthie's field, even the gray mare lifted her head when Marianne entered the lean-to. One evening, Silas brought in a plank and began measuring the wall beside the pantry. "What are you doing?" Marianne asked. "Adding another shelf." "For what?" "Your papers. They're taking over the table. Temporary papers. Temporary things. Still need somewhere to go." She watched him fit the brackets. His back turned to her as if he set the compass there first, leaving space beside it for notebooks and folded maps. Marianne touched the wood with 2 fingers. Neither of them said what the new shelf meant. Ruthie, however, looked from one to the other and smiled as though she had just solved a difficult equation. The first true thaw came in the second week of March, announced not by warmth but by sound. Water began ticking from the eaves before sunrise, then running beneath the snow in invisible channels that made the yard sag underfoot. Silas woke to the creek talking louder than it had all winter. By breakfast, Ruthie had already marked 3 new wet spots in her field notebook, and Marianne stood at the window with Thomas's compass in one hand. Her belly had grown enough that Silas had stopped pretending not to notice how carefully she lowered herself into chairs. "The lower outlet will show us today whether our theory is worth anything," she said. Silas glanced at the sky. Gray clouds were moving fast from the west. "Or, it'll show us how much trouble we bought by waiting." Marianne closed the compass. Waiting was still better than digging blind. He could not argue with that anymore. Rope and the rebuilt wooden brace Silas had fashioned for the collapsed stone chamber. Ruthie begged to come, but the creek was rising too quickly. Silas refused. Marianne backed him, which irritated Ruthie twice as much. The lower field had changed completely. Snow that had seemed permanent only a week before had broken into dirty islands between stretches of flattened yellow grass. Water gleamed in the furrows. Their red cloth markers leaned at odd angles where frost had released its grip. Near the willows, the old outlet chamber gurgled beneath a crust of ice and mud. Silas knelt and pulled away the loose stones while Marianne watched the flow. "Too much backing pressure," she said. "The upper tile is feeding faster than this opening can release." He wedged the wooden brace beneath the sagging wall, then reached deeper to clear packed silt. The first rush came clean. The second brought black mud, leaves, and a dead branch no thicker than his thumb. Then the flow weakened again. Silas frowned. Something else is blocking it. Marianne looked upstream, toward Hembry's boundary. Or the tile broke farther. The ground beside Silas's left boot dropped 2 inches. Marianne caught his coat sleeve and pulled hard. He stumbled backward just as a narrow sinkhole opened where he had been kneeling. Cold water churned through the earth. For several seconds, they moved upslope and probed carefully until the iron rod struck emptiness beneath the sod. The hidden tile had collapsed along a longer section than either had hoped. Silas stared across the soaked field, calculating cost automatically. Replacement tile, hauling, labor, lost planting time. The numbers rose faster than the creek. "If we open all this, I miss spring wheat." Marianne crouched beside one of the stakes, resting both hands on the top for support. "Then, don't open all of it." He looked at her. "You said the broken section has to be replaced. Eventually. But first we give the water another path." She pointed toward a shallow natural swale running diagonally toward the creek. Temporary relief trench. Wider than we planned. Shallower than the tile run, reinforced at the outlet. It sacrifices part of this corner but keeps the rest from drowning. Silas followed the line with his eyes. That sentence struck him because it sounded like something larger than farming. He studied her face and saw fatigue there, but also certainty. He had spent years treating every loss as a failure to prevent. If you have been listening from a place far removed from Silas Ward's muddy Nebraska field, you may already recognize what he had not yet learned. Some homes are built first from timber and land, but others begin with smaller things: an extra coal banked before bed, a place at the table, a hand released when someone asks for space. If this story has kept you company, you can tell us where you are listening from and what you are doing tonight. Now, and the thaw that was beginning to uncover far more than buried drainage tile. They returned to the house, wet to the knees, and found Amos Hembry waiting on the porch with Ruthie. He had brought an old county survey book wrapped in oilcloth, including a sketch of the Ward property before the creek shifted. Marianne traced a faded line with one finger. "There," she whispered. An original outlet ran not toward the current creek bank, but through what was now Hembry's cattle lane. Amos leaned closer. My father filled that ditch when he moved the lane. Silas looked up. He knew it drained this place? Amos's face tightened. Maybe he thought the tile was dead. For the first time, the drainage problem acquired a human history without producing a villain. A practical decision made by one farmer decades before had collided with a creek shift, a later county correction, and Silas's ignorance of what lay underground. Marianne sat back. No one mistake ruined the field, she said. It was a stack of reasonable decisions that stopped being reasonable together. Silas looked at the lead, sounded larger than drainage. After Amos left, Ruthie carried the dishes to the wash basin while Silas remained at the table studying the old field sketch. Marianne reached for the compass, but her hand stopped midway. Thomas made decisions like that, she said quietly. Silas did not ask which ones. She continued anyway. The day he died, the river had started icing at the edges. The bridge was 7 miles north. He wanted to cross at the ford because a contractor was waiting on measurements, and we were already 2 days late. Ruthie slowed at the basin, sensing the change in Marianne's voice. Marianne stared at the brass case instead of either of them. I told him the current looked wrong. He said we had crossed worse. We argued. He accused me of seeing danger because I was pregnant. I accused him of becoming careless because money was short. Her fingers closed around the compass. Then I stopped arguing. That is the part I cannot forgive. Silas said nothing. I climbed into the wagon. She continued. Halfway across, the lead mule broke through shelf ice. Thomas jumped down to cut the trace. The wagon turned. I remember Ruthie had stopped pretending to wash dishes. Silas saw tears standing in her eyes, but Marianne's face remained dry. Grief had gone beyond tears in her. You think agreeing killed him, Silas said. It was not a question. Marianne's mouth tightened. If I had refused to move, perhaps he would have cursed me and gone to the bridge. Or gone alone. She looked at him sharply. Or waited until morning. Or you can build yourself 100 roads backward from what happened. Everyone ends where you already are. Marianne's hand flattened over the compass. That is convenient wisdom from a man who wasn't there. Silas absorbed the blow without defending himself. You're right, I wasn't. He stood, crossed to the cupboard, and took down a small, carved wooden horse Ruthie had once kept on the mantel. Ruthie's face changed immediately. Silas set it beside the compass. My sister carved this for Ruthie when she was 5, he said. She and her husband died 8 days apart in the fever winter. I had gone into town the week before for quinine. Marianne looked from the wooden horse to Ruthie. Silas rested one hand on the chair back. The doctor warned me to keep Ruthie away if the fever worsened. My sister begged me to take her sooner. I said I had chores, that there was time, that families ought to stay together while they could. He swallowed once. 2 days later, I found my brother-in-law barely conscious and my sister unable to stand. Ruthie, Silas continued because stopping would make the confession feel like bait for sympathy. For years, I told myself that if I had taken Ruthie the first day, maybe my sister would have rested. Maybe she would have lived. Maybe if I had noticed sooner, fetched a different doctor, sold a horse for medicine, there was always another maybe. Marianne's gaze lowered. What stopped you? Nothing stopped the thought. I only realized they were making me treat every choice like a trap. That's why I hate unfinished jobs. Why I keep trying to fix trouble before it becomes trouble. Why the room changed after that. Not into comfort exactly, but into a place where neither of them could pretend the other's caution was merely temperament. Marianne picked up the wooden horse and ran her thumb across its worn mane. Your sister made this? Ruthie nodded. Mama carved little animals when Papa was away. Marianne set it carefully beside the compass. Then perhaps we are both too loyal to objects that survived people. Silas sat again. Objects don't know. Her voice thinned. People do. For several moments, only water sounded in the basin. Then Ruthie dried her hands, crossed the room, and put one arm around Marianne's shoulders. The gesture was awkward because of the chair and Marianne's belly. Marianne stiffened at first, then covered Ruthie's hand with her own. Silas stayed where he was. He understood that some moments did not improve when a man entered them. When Ruthie finally went to bed, Marianne remained by the table. "Thank you for telling me," she said. Silas shook his head. "Wasn't a gift? Maybe not. Still cost you something." Their eyes met. No promise followed. None was needed. That night, a hard rain began, unusual and dangerous over frozen ground. Silas woke before dawn to hear water pouring from the roof and the creek roaring beyond the cottonwoods. He dressed quickly and found Marianne already in the kitchen, tying back her hair. "The field?" she asked. "Likely flooding." He started to tell her to stay inside, then stopped. The old reflex had become visible to him now. "I need your judgment," he said instead. "But you ride in the wagon. And if you say you're done, we turn back." Marianne studied him for a second, then nodded. At the lower quarter, their temporary relief line had not yet been cut, and water was already spreading across the sacrificed corner. Yet the old survey book had given them one advantage. They now knew exactly where the original drainage path had run. Marianne directed Silas toward a low break near Hembree's Lane. Amos arrived with 2 sons and shovels before sunrise. Together, they opened a narrow emergency channel through thawing earth. The water found it almost greedily, rushing away from the wheat ground. By evening, the rain had passed, and a strip of pale sunset opened under the clouds. Silas stood on the porch looking toward the lower fields, too tired to remove the mud from his boots. Marianne came beside him, wrapped in the blue shawl. Neither spoke for a while. At last, she said, "You asked my judgment today before telling me what you had decided. Seemed cheaper than being wrong alone." Silas straightened. "Pain? No. Pressure. The baby has dropped lower." He knew enough from farm wives and his sister's pregnancy to understand that this meant time was moving, whether any of them were ready or not. How long? Could be weeks. Marianne looked across the farm. Could be less. The reality settled between them. Their agreement had begun as shelter until the road opened, then work until the drainage was solved. Now spring was coming, and so was her body. Silas glanced back through the window. On the kitchen shelf, the compass rested beside Ruthie's wooden horse. 2 objects from 2 losses, placed together without discussion. "Then we should make a plan," he said. By the last week of March, Silas had begun waking before the rooster, because the farm was making too many sounds for sleep. Water moved beneath the ground now, sometimes whispering through the old tile, sometimes knocking against stone beneath the lower field with a hollow sound that Marianne said was pressure searching for weakness. The emergency channel had saved most of the wheat ground during the rain, but it had also exposed how temporary their solution truly was. Every warm afternoon widened the cut by another inch. Silas began hauling stone to the outlet whenever chores allowed, stacking it beside the willows for the permanent repair. Marianne wanted the work done in stages. First widen the receiving channel, then rebuild the chamber, then reinforce the banks where runoff struck hardest. Silas wanted everything completed before April. "The ground is finally giving," he said one morning. "Another week and planting starts. I can't spend spring digging the same ditch twice." Marianne sat at the table with both hands around her tea. "Then don't. Spend 3 days doing it once." The argument would have ended there if Silas had not received a letter from the bank that afternoon. The envelope bore the name of Jeremiah Cole, assistant cashier in Plum Creek, and contained exactly the kind of polite language that made a man's stomach tighten. The March payment had been noted. The remaining balance on Silas's farm note would be reviewed after spring planting. Mr. Cole requested an updated account of expected acreage, yield, and available collateral before May. Nothing in the letter threatened foreclosure. Nothing needed to. Silas read it twice, folded it into quarters, and tucked it beneath the ledger. Marianne saw enough to understand. "How much depends on getting that lower field planted?" she asked. "Enough. That isn't a number. It's the number I have." His tone closed the subject. She did not push. That made him feel worse. He spent the rest of the afternoon sharpening and calculating how much work he could finish without hiring men. Amos had offered help after his own fencing was done, but Silas told himself he could manage until then. He had survived. The next morning, he started rebuilding the outlet without Marianne. He told himself it was consideration. She had slept badly, her back ached, and the baby had kept her awake half the night. He left Ruthie feeding hens and crossed the lower field before breakfast with a mattock, spade, and the first load of stone. The old chamber came apart faster than expected. By 9 o'clock, he had stripped the collapsed wall to its footing, and by 10 he was laying the new base, proud of the square corners and pleased with how quickly the work moved. He ignored one detail. The soil beneath the outer edge remained soft, despite the morning frost. Marianne had marked that weakness on their plan and specified a deeper footing there. Silas knew it. He also knew that digging another foot meant losing half the day. So he drove 2 cedar stakes, packed stone between them, and convinced himself the reinforcement would hold until summer. When Marianne appeared near noon, walking slowly with Ruthie beside her, she stopped 20 yards away. "You changed the footing." He should have listened then. Instead, the bank letter was in his head, along with planting dates, seed cost, and every year he had watched a good plan turn expensive because weather arrived first. "I know I can't rebuild a Roman bridge every time water crosses my field," he said. Marianne's expression hardened. "That is not what I asked. You asked for deeper footing, more stone, more labor, more time. Because the outside wall carries the force when the channel runs high." "And where do I buy time?" Silas snapped. "Do they sell it beside Lime and Plum Creek?" Ruthie flinched. Marianne's face went still. "No, but apparently pride is plentiful." The words landed cleanly. Silas rose. "This is my land. Yes. My note. Yes. My risk." Marianne stared at him, then put one hand beneath her belly as if supporting its weight. "That is, I am standing here because you hired my judgment. If you want a pair of hands that agrees with everything you already Silas finished the wall exactly as he had planned. That evening, he hated the sight of it. The failure came 2 nights later. A warm south wind blew after sundown, and rain began against the windows shortly before midnight. Silas lay awake, counting the seconds between heavier bursts, telling himself the outlet had already handled worse. At 1 in the morning, Ruthie knocked on his door. "Uncle Silas, I hear something by the barn." He was dressed before she finished. Outside, water was running through the yard in silver sheets. The lower creek had risen enough that its roar carried all the way to the house. Marianne stood in the kitchen doorway wearing her coat over her nightdress. "Don't go alone," she said. "I'm getting Amos." Silas wanted to refuse. Instead, he remembered the conversation beside the outlet and said, water was cutting beneath the cedar stakes exactly where Marianne had warned it would. Each surge removed another fistful of soil. If the wall tipped, the channel would tear open toward the old swale and send water across the lower pasture. Worse, the cattle had already sensed trouble. 3 heifers stood bawling along the high fence, crowded against the gate Silas had meant to repair before the January storm. The brace Marianne had marked with an X was bent outward. Another surge of water crossed the pasture, and the animals shoved toward higher ground. The gate groaned. Silas ran for it, boots sinking above the ankle. He reached the latch as one heifer struck from the inside. The gate swung against him and knocked him backward into the mud. For an instant, he saw only rain. Then the cattle surged through. 2 turned uphill. The third ran directly toward the drainage cut. Silas scrambled after her, shouting, but she slipped at the channel edge and crashed onto one side, all of them carrying his fingerprints. Amos arrived with his sons and a coil of rope. Marianne had sent them first to the cattle, not the outlet. Her orders, Amos shouted through the rain, says save what can drown before saving what can be rebuilt. Silas swallowed the instinct to argue. They looped the rope around the fallen heifer's chest and hauled while she kicked mud into their faces. On the third pull, she found footing and lurched clear. One of Amos's sons drove the cattle uphill, while Silas and Amos dragged a spare fence panel across the broken gate opening. By then, Marianne herself had reached the field in the farm wagon, Ruthie beside her under oil. Silas wiped rain from his eyes. That sends water into the sacrificed corner. Exactly. We'll lose the whole planting strip. Or lose the strip and keep the pasture. He looked toward the field he needed for the bank figures. Marianne stepped closer. Silas, choose the loss. The words reached him through rain, fear, and stubbornness. Choose the loss. He had heard the principle before, but never when it cost this much. Silas looked once at the wheat ground, then raised his shovel. Amos, we open the inner bank. 4 men began cutting. Ruthie held the lantern from the wagon while Marianne used the notebook to guide them toward the shallowest line they had measured weeks earlier. The first breach barely moved the water. They widened it. The second rush nearly took Silas's shovel. Then the channel caught. Water turned away from the damaged outlet and poured across the lower corner in a broad brown sheet. The sound changed immediately. Pressure against the failing wall dropped. The pasture stopped. The barn remained dry. Silas stood in the mud looking at the field he had tried so hard to save, and understood that his hurry had cost more land than Marianne's cautious plan ever would have. Back at the house, Marianne cleaned a cut above Silas's eyebrow where the gate had struck him. He sat at the table without complaint while she pressed a cloth to the swelling. Ruthie had fallen asleep on the settee in her damp clothes, and Amos had gone home to tend his own place. Say it, Silas murmured. Marianne frowned. Say what? That you warned me. You know I warned you. That I hired your job. I saw that bank letter and started treating every hour like it belonged to the bank. I thought if I worked fast enough, I could keep anyone from carrying my trouble. Marianne resumed cleaning the cut. So you carried it badly by yourself? Yes. The admission hurt less than he expected. I'm sorry. Marianne lowered the cloth. For shouting? For making your work count only when it agreed with mine. That landed differently. Then next time I tell you saturated soil won't hold cedar stakes, perhaps we skip the argument. Silas managed a tired smile. That seems ambitious. There was another consequence. 2 days after the flood, Jeremiah Cole came from Plum Creek in a buggy to inspect the damaged acreage. He was not cruel, only careful, which made the conversation and the emergency sacrifice that had protected the remaining ground. Cole asked precise questions. Marianne answered them with equal precision. At last, the banker closed his notebook. You'll plant less wheat. Yes, Silas said, maybe considerably less. Cole looked toward the barn. Then your spring projection changes. Before Silas could answer, Marianne said, so does his usable acreage next year if the permanent drainage. It is badly managed water. Cole studied her. You're certain? Certain enough to put my name under the measurements. Silas turned toward her. She had never before offered to attach her own name to his farm. Cole agreed to review the note again after planting instead of making an immediate demand for additional collateral. It was not mercy and not salvation. Marianne seemed to hear what she had said only after it was spoken. She looked away. The work, I mean. I know what you meant. Neither corrected it further. That evening, Marianne found a letter waiting at the house. Mrs. Halverson had brought it from Plum Creek while they were in the field. The land office in Red Willow still had work available. A clerk had left unexpectedly, and Marianne could have a permanent copying position if she arrived within 3 weeks. The pay was modest but steady. Lodging could be arranged above a widow's boarding house near the courthouse. Silas read none of the letter. Good news? He asked. She folded the page carefully. The work. That night, after everyone slept, Silas went to the pantry and looked at the shelf he had built. Thomas's compass sat there beside Ruthie's wooden horse, with empty space around both. For the first time, he understood that making room for someone did not mean they were obliged to fill it. For 2 days, Marianne carried the Red Willow letter folded inside her apron pocket without answering it. Silas noticed because he noticed everything she tried not to make important. He did not ask. That restraint cost him more than any question would have. Instead, he worked from dawn to dark, preparing for planting with fewer acres than planned, while Marianne revised the farm accounts around the loss. The lower corner, the emergency channel had to be widened before another and whatever labor could be borrowed before. They divided the farm by consequence instead of convenience. The cattle gate came first. He rebuilt the gate with The work took half a day long. Amos brought 2 sons on the third morning. Closed her eyes and breathed through a tightening across her belly. That labor? He asked the second time. No. She waited until it passed. Practice. Amos, overhearing, looked deeply uncomfortable and moved farther down the enough to remind me I cannot schedule the child around your drainage. The Red Willow letter remained unanswered until that evening. Marianne finally placed it on the table between herself and Silas after Ruthie had gone to bed. They need my answer by Friday, she said. Silas stared at the sealed reply paper beside it rather than at her. What do you want? That is the problem. No. The problem is what costs follow whichever thing you want. She leaned back, but only briefly. She touched the edge of the letter. Red Willow means steady wages, a room I can claim as mine, work that does not depend on the health of one farm or one man's banknote. Silas nodded. Each point was sensible. And here? He asked. She glanced toward the shelf where the brass compass sat beside Ruthie's wooden horse. Here is work I understand. A child who asks too many questions. A mare that mistrusts everyone but me. He waited. And? Marianne's fingers tightened on the letter. The next complication came from the sky. On Thursday morning, the temperature rose nearly 20 degrees by breakfast. By noon, a south wind had thickened the air until even the cattle grew restless. Amos rode over with word that heavy rain was expected by evening, followed by a sharp freeze. It was the worst combination for the drainage work. Runoff before the banks had settled, then ice-locking damage in place. Silas walked the lower field with Marianne and Ruthie, examining the relief channel. We can line the weakest bend with stone, he said. Not all of it, Marianne replied. Not enough stone. Then, boards. They'll float if the bank undercuts. Ruthie flipped through her notebook. What about the willow bundles? Both adults turned. Weeks earlier, Marianne had shown Ruthie how survey crews sometimes used brush fastens to stabilize soft ground temporarily. Ruthie pointed toward the creek. We wrote it here. Pack mud behind them. Marianne looked at Silas. She's right. Silas looked toward the stand of willows. We can cut enough before dark. Ruthie grinned. All afternoon they cut willow switches, bound them with baling twine, and carried the bundles to the weakest section of the channel. Amos returned with his sons. Ruthie drove short stakes, while Silas tied the fastens in place. Marianne supervised from the wagon until even she admitted she could no longer stand comfortably. The first rain reached them as thin, warm drops. They worked faster, but enough to matter. Inside, Silas told Marianne. She did not argue this time, which frightened him more than argument would have. He helped her into the wagon and climbed beside her. Halfway to the house, she gripped the seat edge and drew a long breath. Still practice? He asked. She waited. I think so. Another tightening came before they reached the barn. This one lasted longer. Marianne closed her eyes. Mrs. Halverson was sent for at once. Ruthie rode with Amos's eldest son because he had the better horse for the muddy road. Silas wanted to protest, but Marianne said, she knows the route and he knows the horse. Stop making yourself the only tool in the shed. Under other Do you want the bed? Silas asked. Not yet. Tea? No. Food? No. Anything? She stopped and looked at him. Less asking. He nodded. Right. 10 minutes later, he nearly asked again and caught himself. He went outside instead to check the cattle and found the rain already running hard through the yard. The reinforced gate held. The new brace did not shift. Something about that steadiness calmed him. He put a hand on the wet timber and remembered the first version failing under pressure because he had promised himself later would be soon enough. This one had been built for what frightened animals might do, not what he hoped they would do. He went back inside, determined to be equally useful. Mrs. Halverson arrived after dark, soaked but cheerful enough to offend everyone. She examined Marianne, asked blunt questions, and finally announced, "Baby is considering the matter but has not committed." Silas had never hated a sentence more. The road was worsening. Another cold front was coming, and Mrs. Halverson could not remain indefinitely because 2 other women near Plum Creek were due within the month. She stayed the night and left at dawn with instructions. If pains come regular and strengthen, send for me. If water breaks, send for me. If bleeding starts, send for me. Faster. And if the creek bridge washes out, use your head instead of waiting for permission. She said. Mrs. Halverson pointed at her. You save your cleverness for breathing. Friday brought the freeze. Rainwater became ice on the rails, eaves, and rutted road. The relief channel held through the night, though one fascine bundle tore loose near the lower bend. Ruthie spotted it first from the hill and marked the location in her notebook. The creek bridge remained passable. At noon, she carried the page outside where Silas was repairing harness. I declined the position, she said. He stopped working. The joy that rose in him came too quickly, and he pushed it down before it could become a claim. Because of the baby? Partly. Because travel is difficult? Partly. He waited. Marianne looked toward the lower fields. Because I do not want to leave you. I'm not. You are with your face. He exhaled. I am trying very hard to have a better face. That made her laugh, then suddenly wince as another tightening caught her. This time, she had to grip the fence rail. The false labor had become more frequent. By evening, they prepared for 2 emergencies at once. Silas moved extra hay into the barn loft, so he would not need to cross the yard if the ice worsened. Ruthie filled every lamp and set one by the front door, one in the kitchen, and one in Marianne's room. Marianne made her label a basket of clean cloths, thread, scissors, and soap because panic makes fools of memory. The brass compass came down from the shelf and was placed in Ruthie asked. Marianne considered. "'Cause if someone has to travel in bad visibility, you carry tools that help you come home." Silas heard that from across the room. He said nothing, but the sentence lodged deep. He checked the mare's recovering leg, then chose Amos's stronger gelding for any urgent ride. He inspected the wagon harness twice. He laid a rope beside the back door. He stacked split wood beneath the eaves. Every action had been learned: the unclean stove, the thirsty mare, the bad gate, the rushed footing, the old map, the forgotten tile, the need to ask instead of assume. That night, Ruthie fell asleep on the settee with her boots still on. Silas sat at the kitchen table while Marianne rested in the chair opposite, wrapped in her blue shawl. The house seemed prepared for everything except what none of them could control. "You should sleep," Silas said. "So should you. I'm waiting." "For what?" He looked toward the window, where moonlight flashed on ice. Then she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. It was the first time she had touched him without accident, necessity, or instruction. Silas did not move. "You cannot prepare your way out of every fear," she said. "I am beginning to suspect that." "Good." Her thumb shifted once across his knuckles. "Because I am afraid too." "Of the birth?" "Yes." He waited. And of staying. Silas's fingers turned beneath hers until he could hold her hand properly. "You do not have to decide tonight." "That may be the kindest thing you've said to me." "I once offered you beans during a blizzard." The beans were overcooked. They kept you alive. Barely. The joke faded gently. Neither released the other's hand. Near midnight, the wind changed. It came first as a low moan around the north wall, then a sudden hard rattle of ice against the windows. Silas rose and checked the lamp. Outside, clouds had swallowed the moon. Ruthie stirred on the settee. Marianne stood too quickly and caught the edge of the table. Silas crossed the room. "What is it?" Marianne looked down. Water spread across the floorboards at her feet. For one suspended second, no one spoke. Then Ruthie sat upright. Marianne gripped Silas's sleeve, breathing hard. "That," she said, "was not practical." Silas did not ask Marianne. Every instinct in Silas, take the lantern and your field satchel. Go on. The waiting began in pieces measured by Marianne's breathing. Silas heated water, fed the stove, carried blankets, then stood uselessly until she ordered him to stop pacing. The contractions settled into a rhythm neither of them could mistake. Marianne walked between them, one hand against the small of her back. When the pain came, she braced herself against the mantel and breathed through clenched teeth. Silas wanted to touch her every time and asked only once, "Hand?" Or she reached without looking. After that, he let her decide. 40 minutes passed, then an hour. Ruthie had not returned. Wind hammered the shutters. Silas looked toward the window often enough that Marianne finally said, "She has Amos. Trust what you prepared." He nearly laughed at hearing his own lesson returned to him. "I dislike how much you remember. You say memorable things when you're wrong." Another contraction seized her before he could answer. This one bent her near. When it passed, she remained still, breathing quickly. "They're stronger." Silas glanced at the clock. "Closer to." Marianne nodded. The composure she had carried through ledgers, floods, gossip, and debt, a pounding came at the door. Silas opened it to Amos, Ruthie, and Amos's eldest son, Caleb, crusted with ice. No midwife. "Bridge is blocked," Amos said. Ice took a cottonwood down across the approach. "Halverson can't get a buggy through." Silas's stomach dropped. "Horseback?" Amos shook his head. "Creek's running high under shelf ice. She says she'll try the north road with her brother's sleigh, but that adds near 8 miles. Marianne. Ruthie moved to her immediately and took her hand. Amos removed his hat. "Mrs. Halverson sent instructions. Says most babies have more sense than weather, and come whether she approves or not." He produced a folded page protected inside oilcloth. Silas took it. The instructions were simple. Keep Marianne warm. Allow her to move. Do not force food. Prepare clean cloths and cord ties. Watch for bleeding, and let the body work. Silas read the page twice. It was not enough knowledge to make him comfortable. It was enough to keep panic from inventing worse ideas. He handed the paper to Ruthie. "Put it beside your notebook." Marianne stared at him through another contraction. "You look terrible." Near 2 in the morning, the storm added another problem. Water began dripping through the north corner of the kitchen ceiling. Silas climbed into the loft with a lantern and discovered wind had ripped loose 2 roof shingles above the stove wall. Meltwater from accumulated ice was running beneath the roof boards. In any ordinary night, it would have been a repair. Tonight, if water reached the stovepipe or soaked the woodpile stacked along the wall, they could lose heat at the worst possible time. Silas started toward the roof ladder. Ruthie blocked him. "You told me not to be brave beyond instructions. This is the roof. And she is in labor." Amos, standing behind her, took the ladder from Silas's hand. "My boys and I can patch shingles." For 1 second, Silas resisted out of habit. Then Silas returned downstairs. Marianne saw his empty hands. "You stayed. Apparently, I've become teachable." She reached for him as the next contraction began. By 3, labor had moved beyond conversation. Marianne's world narrowed to the bed, the washstand, the distance between one pain and another. Ruthie kept water warm and recorded contraction times in the same field notebook that had once held ditch measurements. Pages that had tracked runoff, frost, and tile depth now carried another kind of weather. Silas noticed the strange continuity and nearly, "I need you here." He sat beside her. "I'm here." Her face tightened. "Say something ordinary." The south gate held. Her eyes opened in disbelief. "That is what you chose? You asked for ordinary." A breath that might have been a laugh escaped her. Again, Silas searched desperately. The gray mare put weight on her bad leg yesterday. Better. Ruthie cheated at cards last Tuesday. From across the room, Ruthie protested. Marianne laughed once, and then cried out as the contraction peaked. The sound stripped humor from the room. Silas held her hand and did nothing else, because nothing else was his to command. Shortly before dawn, fear entered the room in a new shape. Marianne began shaking between contractions even though the room was warm. Amos had gone back outside to check the patched roof. Ruthie stood beside the bed, holding Mrs. Halverson's instructions. "It says shaking can happen," she said, trying to sound older than 14. Marianne looked at Silas. "I need to push." His mouth went dry. The midwife had not arrived. Then we follow the laid-out clean cloths, boiled the scissors and cord thread as instructed, and forced himself to move one task at a time. Marianne shifted forward, breathing harder. Silas stayed near her shoulder until she grabbed his sleeve. "No, you're helping. Marianne, you have delivered calves. You are not a cow." An excellent observation. Use the parts of the knowledge that apply. Silas did what the written instructions told him. Support, do not pull, keep hands clean, watch, wait. The child began to crown as gray morning slowly entered the windows. Then progress stopped. Marianne pushed again. Nothing. Her strength was fading. Silas could hear fear climbing into Ruthie's breathing. "What?" Marianne demanded. "What is happening?" Silas looked. He knew just enough to see that the baby's head had emerged, but the shoulders had not followed. Panic struck him so sharply that the room seemed to tilt. He could have pulled. The ruined gate every time haste had mistaken itself for competence. "Ruthie," he said, keeping his voice level. "Read the page. Anything about shoulders." She scanned the paper, hands shaking. Nothing. Then Marianne spoke through clenched teeth. "Change my position." Silas looked at her. "Camp women. I helped twice." Marianne bore down with a sound that seemed torn from somewhere older than language. The baby slipped free into Silas's hands. For half a second, the child was utterly silent. That half second would remain with him for the rest of his life. Then the baby coughed, drew breath, and screamed. Ruthie burst into tears. Marianne collapsed backward, laughing and crying at once. Silas stood frozen with the child in his hands until Ruthie shouted, "Uncle Silas, wrap him. Him, a boy." Silas laid the baby against Marianne's chest and covered both with a warm cloth. The child's fists opened and closed furiously against his mother, as if objecting to every inconvenience of birth. "Marianne," the words returned him to the first night he had felt the baby kick beneath his hand. Stubborn too, Silas said. Definitely mine. Outside, hoofbeats sounded in the yard. Mrs. Halverson arrived less than 20 minutes later in a narrow sleigh, furious with the weather and everyone who had allowed the baby to arrive before her. She examined Marianne and the child, pronounced both exhausted but sound, then made Silas leave the room while she completed the work he had been terrified, even to name. He went to the kitchen and found Ruthie sitting at the table beside the open field notebook. Thomas's compass lay beside it, wet from the storm where she had carried it to Amos's farm. Silas picked it up. A thin scratch crossed the brass lid. "I dropped it by the south gate," Ruthie admitted. "I'm sorry." Marianne's voice came faintly from the bedroom doorway. "Does it still point north?" Ruthie opened the case. The needle trembled, then settled. "Yes." Marianne smiled tiredly. Then it survived what the weeks afterward changed the house more quietly than the birth had. Marianne named the boy Thomas Elias Doyle. Silas did not flinch at Thomas. In fact, when the baby would not sleep unless walked, Silas sometimes murmured, and recording the baby's weight on the same pages where drainage measurements had once lived. Mrs. Halverson laughed when she saw this. "You people keep records on everything?" Ruthie answered. "Only important things." Outside, the relief channel held. The willow bundles rooted into soft banks as spring advanced, sending pale green shoots through the mud. The repaired gate stood straight. This time no one shortened the footing. By May, the sacrificed lower corner had become a rough strip of grass and willow instead of wheat. Silas discovered he did not hate looking at it. The lost acreage had saved the rest of the field, and the remaining crop came up green and time earned by admitting what could not be forced. Marianne began doing bookkeeping for Amos and 2 other neighboring farms from Silas's kitchen table, earning cash without leaving Thomas or surrendering her independence. Her work spread by reputation. "Mrs. Doyle finds money you've misplaced inside your own stupidity," Amos told people in Plum Creek. Marianne objected to the wording, but not the business. One evening in early June, Silas came inside and found Marianne packing her old satchel. He stopped in the doorway. For a moment, every lesson vanished and January returned. The storm, the shawl, the woman insisting she would not be pushed back into the snow. Marianne saw his face. "I'm not leaving." Silas released a breath carefully. That is an unkind way to begin a conversation. I'm moving the survey papers into the desk. He looked at the satchel. And this? I don't need to keep everything packed anymore. The statement was so simple that it took him a moment to understand its weight. Marianne lifted Thomas's compass from the bag and placed it on the shelf beside Ruthie's wooden horse. Then she turned toward Silas. I've been waiting to feel certain, she said. About staying. About you. About whether choosing another life means betraying the one I had. Silas did not move closer. And I don't think certainty comes first. She glanced toward the cradle, where baby Thomas slept with one fist beside his cheek. I think sometimes you build the footing deep enough, then trust what you built. Silas smiled. That sounds suspiciously like drainage. I have limited metaphors. He crossed the room then, slowly enough that she could stop him. Marianne, I don't need Thomas to call me father. I don't need you to forget his father. I don't need the town to understand what this house is before we do. Her eyes filled. What do you need? She asked. Silas looked around the room. Ruthie's books, the field notebook, the extra shelf, the compass, the wooden horse, the cradle he had built without pretending the wood happened to fit. You, he said, choosing to be here after you know you can leave. Marianne stepped forward. I already did. Their first kiss was quiet, brief, and almost interrupted by Thomas waking in the cradle. When the baby began to cry, Marianne laughed against Silas's shoulder. There, she said, he objects. He has strong opinions. You encouraged him. I met him once, under difficult circumstances. Months later, in early autumn, the lower corner of the field had become a ribbon of willow and grass, following the new drainage channel toward the creek. Silas kept it that way, instead of reclaiming every possible foot for wheat. Ruthie said the green strip looked like a line drawn across the farm. Marianne said all useful lines ought to lead somewhere. On a bright September evening, she stood at the edge of that field with Thomas balanced on one hip, while Ruthie practiced taking a compass bearing toward the cottonwoods. Silas came up behind them carrying fence tools. The wheat beyond the channel moved gold beneath the wind. Ruthie sighted along the compass and frowned. North is that way, she said. Marianne adjusted the baby against her shoulder. Then where's home? Ruthie rolled her eyes. That isn't what a compass tells you. Silas set down his tools and looked toward the farmhouse, where lamplight already glowed in the kitchen window. No, he said, that part you choose. And together, before the evening cooled, they walked back across the field.